Welcome to the Six Hats podcast, where I, Dr. Shami, a lifestyle and nutritional medicine family doctor, will talk about how women strive to find balance each day by juggling their six roles, being a woman, mother, daughter, partner, business owner, and professional. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Six Hats podcast. And it's an absolute honor to have Dr. Josef join us today. Now, he is a psychiatrist renowned for his expertise in the field of drug tapering and withdrawal management. Now, with years of experience in clinical psychiatry, he has developed a particular interest and specialization in assisting patients with a safe and effective tapering of psychiatric medications. Now, his approach is patient-centered, focusing on individualized plans that prioritize the patient's well-being and functioning. And believe it or not, he's actually from Australia. So thank you so much, Josef, for coming on. And you're currently living in the States. So welcome, Josef.
It's a pleasure to be here, 8 p.m. Mountain time, and calling in from Utah. But it's glad to do so. I love talking about this.
Amazing. So Josef, I really, really want to start because I've been listening intently to your amazing YouTube channel, and I think so many listeners need to go onto it. And it really struck me, and I loved how you talked about over-medication in one of the YouTube stories. And it really has brought to light, when I really think back over the years, 23 years in medicine, how quickly GPs are very quick to prescribe antidepressants. And I'd love to just share a quick story. I met a friend at a wedding 2 years ago, and we hadn't seen him in a couple of years, and he just mentioned the last year had been so challenging for him. His mother died and his wife left him after 30 years. And he actually described the whole GP experience. But he said, look, guys, I'm in such a better place. I'm good. I'm really good. But then he mentioned when he did go and see his GP, he was prescribed antidepressants. But what was really good about it, that he didn't take it. He made a note about it. Look, I didn't take it. I didn't need it. And it really made me reflect, how quick are we to give it out, and why we're not talking about key side effects that we're going to go into today. I'd love to know your thoughts on over-medication.
Yeah, I think I love the subject because there's so many things that go into it. And if I were to just share a little bit about myself, this was actually the issue that put me on this path towards getting into deprescribing. I came into psychiatry really interested in self-help, psychology, philosophy. And so I was really inclined that way. I had my own difficulties. If I look back at growing up, although it probably didn't look like it on the outside, I always felt like I had a hard time connecting with people. It just didn't happen intuitively for me. And there's a range of ways that plays out in someone's life, and a lot of them I think are kind of obvious, but I often read books. I kind of thought about it in different ways, and I always found that really helpful. And I went into medicine. I was telling you about this. My mom's Chinese Malay, and so there's a lot of that kind of Chinese stuff in there, like go to med school and all of this. And so that was really kind of my story. And I was just like, well, I really love psychology, all this kind of stuff. I said, psychiatry, what a cool outlet for that. I get to combine this medicine degree, which I now have, with that. And I ended up going to the US. In my first year, when I got there, something was off. And it probably would have been the same in Australia, but in some ways, the US makes problems worse because there's more money there and when it comes to these influences. But I just started noticing that all of the stuff which I thought would have been good of routine psychiatric care, like really understanding the people that were coming in, their problems, their families, why they see the world in certain ways, even things like diet and different things like that. All of these things which I had learned were really important, and kind of in my own story and my reading, were simply neglected. There was a very quick transactional approach to visits, and people would come in, they would fill out a questionnaire, they'd walk out with a medication. And I kind of suspended my judgment of this for a while, what I was seeing. I was just like, oh, these guys, they must know something that I don't know. And they kept on talking about anxiety and depression as this kind of mysterious and hard to understand illness that's chronic and recurrent. Maybe there's biological factors there. And so we use these medications. And I said, okay, well, maybe I'll go with that for a while. But intuitively, to me, I was just like, doesn't seem to be the right. We're not even asking the questions to understand the level at which we need to be helping these people. And so it really didn't sit right for me for a long time. And so I started becoming interested in drug side effects because I started thinking, well, there must be a downside to giving these medications out so freely. Because I guess I arrived at the place was, oh, maybe it's not that bad. It's just something that we have to do because it's quick and, the system is burdened and maybe it's not that bad. And so I had to understand what the downsides were. And when I started looking into it, I realized that there were a lot of pretty significant problems with these drugs, which were really unpredictable. If they happened to you, they could be permanent and no one was talking about them. And I started being more and more at odds with my profession, started getting in trouble in residency, going to professionalism meetings because I would just be not wanting to over medicate patients. And that didn't sit right. And I just felt completely like a fish out of water. And I eventually wanted to quit. And my wife, kind of fiance at the time, was just like, just pull your head in, like just get through this and then you can kind of practice your own way. And so honestly, I felt like kind of like an outcast and kind of felt like an idiot at times, being like, why do I see things so differently? Aren't people talking about this? And I managed to channel that interest in side effects to actually a career in drug safety. And so after I left residency, I ended up going to the FDA and studying drug side effects, and then the pharmaceutical industry, where I worked as a drug safety officer. And I'm sharing all of this because these pieces are all kind of important if we're going to talk about the issue of overprescription, because all of these different things gave me a new perspective on it. And if I was going to talk about why do we overprescribe psychiatric medications, it comes down many ways to commercial influences. And surprise, surprise, is going to be a surprise like no one listening to this, but it was to me at the time. But when companies out there, drug companies, when they make drugs, they have an incentive to make sure that the doctors view these drugs in the most favorable way. And so they generate a lot of research that kind of promotes that. And they don't need to generate any research that focuses on the negatives. And so they don't. And over time, this bias that's kind of created because of an agenda to sell the drugs and to be a profitable company, which they have to do for their shareholders, it skews the way that doctors start thinking about the drugs. They end up seeing them as more beneficial and perhaps even less risky than they are. So that's one major thing that I saw inside the pharmaceutical industry. Because I've got stories there where we'd say, wow, man, we really need to generate a manuscript about this. And it would just get shut down by the chief medical officer. They'd be like, oh, we don't want to blow this out of proportion. FDA is not saying anything. There's no need to do that. And I think that just happens every day in industry, and it has this accumulative effect. So there's this one piece of it, right, where there's the group with the biggest microphone and the war chest full of resources is pharma, and they're just pumping out a message to make things seem safer than they are. But then you have this other thing, and this may not be as much of a factor in Australia, although I suspect it is anywhere where there is money to be made in healthcare. But healthcare has become increasingly like a business, right? And I think in many ways they want mental health problems to be like UTIs, like, oh, you've got pain down there, you pee in a cup, you've got this, take this, see you later. Case closed in 5 minutes. But mental health really doesn't lend itself to that. In fact, to do it well, you need to spend a lot of time with people, and it's not scalable at all. And that really doesn't sit well if you're a private equity group, running a chain of clinics or a hospital group. And so more and more, we've got these commercial incentives sort of shortening the visits, and it kind of filters through to the way the doctors are paid as well, where at least with insurance in the US, you get paid more if you see 4 people in an hour for 15 minutes than if you saw 1 person for an hour, substantially more than double. And so that's like another incentive in a way to be like, well, I'm going to practice in a way where I can, quickly prescribe. And, there's all this research generated by industry to say that it's okay. And that's kind of the surface level. When I think about it, it's such a web of influence, because there's marketing around it as well. And mental health is political in a way. And there's certain ways they talk about it in the media that have been kind of constructed. But the major factors that I really see is the kind of the corruption of medical education and information by commercial forces. And then also the commercial forces in the clinic. Gosh, that was a long answer. I hope that was okay. Yeah.
I was just reflecting in my training going, yes, yes, yes. Because when you leave med school, you're a bit overwhelmed, and interestingly, you do learn a lot of stuff from drug reps, and you suddenly go, oh my God, I've just learned about a drug from a drug rep. What's going on? And then it's the word of mouth. What are your colleagues prescribing? What are they doing? And it just goes into the spiral. And rather than thinking for yourself, is that the right thing for my patient? And you're absolutely right. Mental health needs time. It takes time to sit down and actually ask about their life and ask about lifestyle factors and nutrition. And there's so much more to it rather than just saying this pill is going to solve it. And it's really interesting. I'd love for your thoughts. Are we living in a society that are we losing the ability to build resilience? And it's something that's really, I've come across just seeing so many different stages of people's lives going, wow, we're so fearful of challenges. And some of these challenges are actually a normal part of life and why we're medicating during these challenges. And I've actually got so many patients who say, I want to be able to feel the drugs are numbing me and I want to be able to feel and get through this rather than being medicated. And it's great because obviously I can support them through it. But I'd love your thoughts on life in general and the challenges and why we're so quick to stop ourselves from feeling it.
Yeah. I mean, gosh, I wish I had a prepared answer for this. So I'm going to give you one off the cuff and hopefully it goes down well. I feel like it has become maybe a lot more culturally acceptable to see mental health problems as maybe medical problems in a way. I spend a lot of time on social media. It's where I do most of the marketing for my business. I'm always on kind of TikTok, kind of scrolling around there. And me, and not just me, other people have noticed, the way we talk about mental illness, it's often, these are mysterious medical conditions. It's like, oh, my depression is this, or, my anxiety. And just the way I think that we talk about it sometimes, because I think intuitively to a lot of people when they're sad or anxious, not everyone, but a vast majority of people really know why they're sad or anxious. I mean, the more intuitive response is, oh, I'm depressed because I live in poverty and I'm a single mom and I'm overworked and it's really challenging, or I have a lot of anxiety because maybe I'm in an abusive relationship or this chronic loneliness. These are more intuitive ways to understand depression and anxiety caused by life hardship. And that's mostly what it is. Sure, there's some other causes, but mostly life hardship is. But we've moved away in many ways from talking about depression and anxiety as I'm depressed and anxious because of X, Y, and Z, which is totally normal and human. And we've started saying it's, oh, my depression or my anxiety, almost as if it's this kind of medical condition. And it's kind of mysterious. And in many ways, I think this way of looking at it was introduced kind of under the guise of, hey, we want to make this, we don't want people to feel like weak or like a failure in their life by having it. So we're going to say it's a serious medical condition that requires treatment, but it's kind of gone too far now where normal life hardships have people don't even really dig in or look at that anymore. Or maybe there's some kids, who are really unhappy and someone took a little bit of time to get to know them, what's happening in their life and in their home. They might say, well, no shit, you're, anxious and depressed, with everything going on. But nowadays with things being so quick and there's being this kind of incentive to get things kind of moved through really quickly, they're like, okay, 5 out of 9 symptoms in the DSM, you meet criteria. We've got a clinical trial that shows you can get this. And so there's that part of it, just in the way I think we think about these problems. There's also the part where we think the drugs are really safe, right? And so all over social media these days, live, laugh, Lexapro, and, there's memes about it, let's not pill shame people. Let's be proud of taking medications. And I think when there's this ubiquity to it and we see it everywhere, and it is everywhere. I mean, we're talking 1 in 6 people in the Western world are taking long-term antidepressants, and most of the median use is around 2 years. So that's an awful lot of people. And so when it seems so commonplace as well, I think there's this safety aspect to it where it's like, hey, it's not that big of a deal. Everyone is taking it. And so I don't know. I would hesitate to say that people are maybe like weaker these days. They don't want to address their things so much as it's like, it just feels like taking medications is really culturally acceptable and just it's totally okay and not a big deal, and just look after yourself and your health and just go ahead and do it. And that is not the right message with these medications, because good God, if people really knew kind of some of the problems you could end up in with these meds, only the people who were the most severely depressed and anxious and had tried everything else would take them, because gosh, they can be life-changing in a very negative way.
Absolutely, Joseph. And that leads me on beautifully to my next question on 2 conditions when I was listening to your podcast going, wow, I did know about it. And one of them is
Mhm.
protracted withdrawal syndrome after stopping SSRIs and also post-SSRI sexual dysfunction. I know they're two big topics, but I just want to sort of share and spread the awareness. Could you describe what they actually mean?
Yeah, so they're kind of confusing. And so I'm going to nip this in the bud
Yeah.
now. So protracted withdrawal is, and I might use kind of some shocking language here because I want to make the point, it's brain damage is what it is. It's a neurological injury that happens in, I'm going to say in uncommon cases. So when you come off the drug really rapidly. So if you've rapidly gone off an antidepressant and you're fine, that's really normal. In fact, the vast majority of people who are rapidly pulled off these meds are okay. But there is a tiny fraction of people that when they come off the meds, they go into states of severe withdrawal. And there seems to be something almost toxic about being in that state. And what these people find is the doctor rapidly takes them off the med. They go into a severe withdrawal. They're told it's okay, it's going to get better, you'll be all right. But then it doesn't. And the symptoms that they develop look completely different. Well, there's some overlap. So there's some overlap with depression and anxiety, but it's much more severe. But then they develop a host of neurological problems. They have severe dizziness, a lot of gastrointestinal issues, severe, nausea, gut problems. Sometimes they feel like they feel waves of energy pulsing through their body. People have even said it feels like they're being shocked by a cattle prod at times. And unlike a typical withdrawal syndrome, once you develop this, some people might say, well, let's just put the drug back in and bring it down slowly. But it doesn't respond that way. You bring the drug back on and the symptoms don't go away. And so that's why I call it a brain injury, because it happens during withdrawal, but if you reintroduce the drug, it doesn't go away. And this condition, thankfully, does have a good prognosis long term, but it's incredibly painful. Sometimes it can take several years for it to recover, and it recovers just through neuroplasticity once the drug is out. If you give the body enough time and you support these people over several years, they return back to their baseline. But they make no mistake, they've had a brain injury, and a lot of people end up on disability for several years. And it is impossible to predict who this is going to happen to. And that's why it's so important that anyone who's coming off these medications needs to do so in a way where it really minimizes the amount of withdrawal that they're having. And that means if you've been on it for several years, you might be tapering over 18 months, and that's okay. And that's just the way that you need to do it to make sure you don't expose yourself to the risk of a life-changing incident like protracted withdrawal.
Is it related to how long someone takes the medication, or it's not related? And for example, like if someone's on it for 2 to 3 months, coming off it, are the chances less?
I mean, that makes sense to me. Anecdotally, I've seen both people on the benzodiazepines and the antidepressants develop problems after as little as a couple months, 2 to 3 months, but it is very uncommon. Most of the people who develop these problems have been on them for 10 years. And even out of that group of people, it's a small group of people who, when they come off rapidly, they develop this problem. So I like to think about it. Yeah, the longer you're on the medication, the more the brain is more used to it. It's kind of grown around those chemicals in there. It's like a part of the brain. And if you yank it out suddenly, then there's a lot of imbalance. There's going to be more imbalance in the brain that's been kind of used to that for several years, and more potential for severe withdrawal. And I think it's the severe withdrawal symptoms that are actually the damaging part in the people who are susceptible to the injury.
Amazing, Joseph. Now, I'd love to move on quickly onto post-SSRI sexual dysfunction. And there's even a whole, so many people are talking about it on social media now, and there's some groups set up. But I'd love to know, what exactly does that mean?
Yeah, so post-SSRI sexual dysfunction was actually, I guess it started as a research term for a group of researchers who were following up on reports from people who had developed these persistent sexual problems after taking antidepressants. And so they narrowed it in and said, we're going to call it PSSD, post-SSRI sexual dysfunction. But honestly, it happens with a lot more of the antidepressants now. So the SNRIs, so things like Effexor, venlafaxine, Cymbalta, it's happened with those. And also a lot of the tricyclics like imipramine, clomipramine, the older antidepressants. I've heard some cases for mirtazapine and even for Wellbutrin, although they are much less common than with the serotonergic ones. And so essentially what it is, it's very common for people to develop sexual side effects when they take antidepressants, but they're usually just linked to when the person is on the drug. You'll come off the drug and within a month or so, sexual function will return to normal. But for some people, that's not the case. They'll either continue to have sexual or sexual functioning that's substantially different than before they got on the drug, after they come off. And some people actually, the process of withdrawing off the antidepressants almost triggers a worsening, which sounds really unusual, but it's not an uncommon effect in psychiatry. And it does happen with the antipsychotics and the movement disorders, where there's something about taking them off the medication that kicks it off. And so some histories, people will take the medication, they'll have some impairment in sexual functioning. And then when they come off, it rises to a whole nother level. And one thing that's important about this is it's actually characteristically very different from the other causes of sexual dysfunction. And so the two different things one might think about would be performance anxiety or anxiety related sexual dysfunction. And then also we've got issues such as cardiovascular disease, which presents with more of in men, like an impotence problem, difficulty getting an erection due to vascular obstructions. But with performance anxiety type stuff, you still have morning erections. You may be able to masturbate without any issue. But PSSD, the sexual problems there, not only do you have difficulty maintaining an erection, people describe sensory problems, which are very unique and very different from other forms of sexual dysfunction. They describe what we call like a loss of erogenous sensation. And so that's that kind of sexual feelings kind of in that genital area where, the touch just feels different down there. And so people will either say it feels like I'm touching a non-sexual part in my body, like the back of my arm or something, or they'll sometimes say it's completely numb. And so that part of it is really unusual. Then there's also a lot of cognitive problems in some of these individuals. It's kind of widespread issues. And so they have a lot of brain fog and difficulty concentrating and intense dissociation. Some of these people describe feeling so numbed out. It's like they're watching their life kind of through a TV, completely disconnected from things. And I'll speak a little bit on PSSD because I do think sometimes this stuff sounds kind of out there, but it's been acknowledged by the second largest drug regulator in the world, the EMA. The EU has updated all of the labels for the antidepressants to warn doctors about it. And it's gaining momentum, and more countries are putting it in the drug labels so doctors can start to have proactive discussions with people about this. Because even though it is an uncommon risk, I think if you just told someone with anxiety and depression, hey, there's a chance you might develop this, people would want to know, even if it was exceedingly rare or uncommon. We don't know what the incidence is. People would want to know. So I think it's the biggest story at the moment in psychiatric drug side effects.
Wow. And is this correct? Is it permanent once you come off it, or they do get better eventually?
There's a spread. Some people report improvement over 6 months, sometimes a couple of years. But there is a large group of people who are still having problems years later, sometimes even decades later, much like the protracted withdrawal. Actually, I'd say the prognosis is a little worse than protracted withdrawal. Protracted withdrawal tends to recover in most everyone given enough time. But just from speaking to a lot of people with PSSD, they don't say things like the other drug injury people, the benzo and the antidepressant injuries. They'll say, I'm getting a little bit better every year. When I talk to people with PSSD, many of them have had no movement in several years. So in some ways, it's a scarier thing to have. That doesn't mean that some people don't improve. They do, but it's harder.
Amazing. Thank you, Joseph. And before we let you go, and I think this is so important coming from a psychiatrist. So when we're looking at mental health, what would you say the top 3 lifestyle factors you would always advise your patients that can help with mental health?
Oh, geez. Yeah. I think diet is one of the ones that's really overlooked. And I guess you're in functional medicine, so maybe your audience is already kind of awake to this, but a lot of other people kind of just roll their eyes when you bring up diet. Hey, if diet was so important, my doctors would be talking to me about it. But there's hardly, I'm just going to say this because this goes back to the pharma thing. There is no financial incentives out there for people to be talking about diet. The reason everyone hears about drugs is there is a war chest, billions of dollars pushing that message. Diet is really important. If I think about some lifestyle things, if you're having joint pain, if you're having diarrhea, constipation, if you're having, signs of autoimmune things, for goodness sakes, look at your diet as soon as possible. It may have a tremendous impact on your mental health. So diet's something that you need to look at, especially if you're try an elimination diet. That's great. So that's one thing that you should look at. Other things I would say, just general good kind of mental health things. And it's things that we know tend to make most people happy, not everyone. And that's socializing, if that's something, that you do, making sure you're around friends and loved ones. And then also exercise, being in green spaces, walking. There's so many, we're so complicated, right? And then there's also finding meaningful work. All of these things are kind of a really intense task master on their own, but sometimes that's just what life is about. That's the way I see it. You look at all of these things and you kind of chip away at them until you kind of build a nice, pleasant, happy life.
Amazing. Amazing, Jason. Now, before we let you go, where can people find you?
Yeah, so probably where the best place to find me is on the YouTube channel. It's Dr. Josef, and it's the German spelling. My dad is he's Austrian, so it's Josef. And then I think across TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, Taper Clinic. That's Taper Clinic. And if you have any listeners in the US and they need help with drug tapering, we are servicing nearly half the US at the moment. And so that would be taperclinic.com, Taper clinic.com.
Amazing, Joseph. And this question just popped into my head. If you could tell the doctors, the GPs, about when they counsel someone about antidepressants, what's the one thing that you don't want us to forget to tell our patients?
Wait, say that again. Sorry, I zoned out for a second. What was the question?
If you could tell doctors around the world, whoever's listening, one thing that you must not forget when you're trying to counsel someone about whether they go on to antidepressants or not, what would that be?
Interesting. Okay. Give me a few moments to reflect on that one. Yeah. One thing.
Because it's really interesting when I look at my training, I go, wow, I really didn't think about those severe rare side effects, which are really important. Because now in my now when I practice, I see that. I've seen someone with protracted withdrawal. I've seen someone with sexual dysfunction. He's really young. And I go, where was the training and what would I do differently going back in my own in my own sessions with my GPs, with my patients?
I was going to say, would you mind if we went on for like another 5 minutes, actually? Because there is something that I want to add if you have the time.
Absolutely. You've got the stage.
Yeah. Okay. So one thing that I'm also pretty passionate about is, I treat people with rare side effects because they cause the neurological problems, but we don't talk about probably what I would consider the most important side effect with the antidepressants. And this is something that happens to everyone. And in some ways it's I'm going to say opportunity cost, which may seem kind of strange, but we have to think about what is the impact of taking a drug that is kind of blunting to your emotions, because that's the primary effect of the drug, right? So if you might have, there's no chemical imbalance or anything like that. When it comes to the antidepressants, they tend to be kind of emotional constrictors. They kind of rein in irritability, anxiety, all of that. And that can be really therapeutic for some people for periods of time if they're very anxious. But what's happening is, we're kind of causing emotional constriction. And much like, I'm going to bring in an analogy, is think of antidepressants almost like a cast that you would place on a broken arm, right? If you were in a state of severe anxiety because there was a lot of chaos in your life, maybe reining in your emotions and turning them down might help you for a period of time. But much like leaving a cast on a broken arm, if you leave it there too long, the arm kind of atrophies and it actually makes the problem worse over time. And so the problem with taking antidepressants long term is it is better for the majority of people to learn how to function with their full emotional range. And difficulty is these states of anxiety and depression that people may find themselves in could be there for very legitimate things. There could be trauma, abusive relationships, whole range of, maybe there's maladaptive ways that they deal with situations where if they really got the psychological help that they deserve, they might be able to really adapt to them and thrive. But they're being robbed of that opportunity because doctors aren't helping them in that way in their current model. And so they never really get that. It could be a dietary thing. Your body may be telling you that some of this food that you're eating is just not a good fit for you. And you are turning off the smoke detectors in your house, essentially. You are turning them off. And so I think there's a huge opportunity cost to just turning that system off until you've investigated everything else. Like if you've done everything else and you're still having problems, by all means, go into it with an open mind. But if you haven't, you may find yourself, like many of the patients that I work with now, on these drugs for 15, 20 years, coming off and they say the craziest things. They just say, wow, it's like, I don't know what to do with these emotions. Or, they'll say things like, I had no idea how turned off I'd become. I hadn't really been paying attention to the emotional needs of my children. They hadn't been hitting me. And now that I'm off, it's like I'm seeing the world in a whole new way. I mean, the effect that these drugs can have on your emotional antennae and kind of picking up on the feelings of those around you can be profound. They have a lot of impacts on relationships. And so if you want to call it a side effect, even though it's a direct effect, I mean, that is the consequence of long-term antidepressant use. And so we shouldn't be turning these systems off. If you use them for a really short time and then help people in the way they truly deserve to be helped, which is why getting to the root cause. And anyway, so that is kind of my soapbox. And maybe that would be what I would tell the GPs as well.
Absolutely brilliant. I feel like that needs to be recorded and put into training schedules for GPs, because that's an amazing sort of spiel to actually give to a patient, because that's the reality of it. It's turning off. I love the way you said it, turning off the emotions. Yes, you can get through a really difficult period, but you need to feel it. And I actually hear so many patients say, I don't want to feel numb. I don't want to just increase the tablet just because I'm going through a rough time. And it's been reported time and time again about the numbing feeling, but no one, it's hard to find the time to actually explore it. And I think that's really worth doing. But amazing chat, Dr. Joseph. Yeah. Such an honor. And this is such an important topic. And that's why I really wanted to get this message out there. So thank you so much for your time today.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for giving me a platform to talk about what I love.
Amazing. Remember that this is general advice only. Please see your healthcare professional for more information. So what's your take-home message today? Remember, it's all about progress and not perfection. And are you suffering from stress? Visit the Usawa Learning Hub on usawa.com.au for more resources on how to de-stress, re-energize, and reclaim your health. Enjoy the journey.